Mrs. Chicken and Hungry Crocodile. Now this is a special story to me because it's a traditional story. And it comes from the Dan people of northeastern Liberia in Africa. Now the information on the inside of the book says, the Dan people are rice farmers who are known for their storytelling, wood carving, masked dancing, and music. Now, the first author of this book is of African descent, and his name has a very unusual spelling, W-O-N-L-D-Y. Now, if you're like me and you're not familiar with African type names, you have to check the internet to figure out how to pronounce this name. And apparently, it is pronounced One Day Pay. So the authors are One Day Pay, Margaret H. Lippert, and the book is illustrated by Julie Pashkis. One morning, Mrs. Chicken took her bath in a puddle. "Cluck, cluck," she said proudly. "What a pretty chicken I am. Big bright eyes, short smooth beak, but I can't see my wings. This puddle is too small." So Mrs. Chicken, cluck, cluck, is looking at her reflection in a puddle. It works like a mirror. So she walked down to the river to get a better look. She didn't know that Crocodile lay in the river all day long, waiting for her dinner. Mrs. Chicken leaned over the water. She said, "I still can't see my wings. I see scaly green legs and a long mouth with sharp teeth, but where is my beak?" Crocodile lay very still and waited. "Yum, yum," she thought. "That's my dinner." "I look different in the river," said Mrs. Chicken. She turned to one side. Crocodile did too. Mrs. Chicken turned to the other side. So did Crocodile. "I'd like a closer look," said Mrs. Chicken, and she stepped into the river. What do you think happened next? Snap! Crocodile grabbed Mrs. Chicken's foot in his mouth. "Quack, quack!" said Mrs. Chicken. "Let go!" Crocodile shook her head. She dragged Mrs. Chicken to her house in the middle of the river. Then she slammed the door shut with her tail, boom, and opened her mouth. Mrs. Chicken flew up to the rafters. There's Mrs. Chicken up on the rafters, trying to stay away from Crocodile. "Come down," Crocodile said. "I'm going to eat you up." "Me?" said Mrs. Chicken. "You can't eat me. Quack, quack." "Oh, yes, I can," said Crocodile. "But," said Mrs. Chicken, "you shouldn't eat me." "Why not?" asked Crocodile. "Because," said Mrs. Chicken, "I'm your sister." Crocodile laughed. You're not my sister. You have speckled feathers. I have green skin. You have a beak. I have a mouth with sharp teeth. And these teeth are going to eat you up. No, said Mrs. Chicken. We look different, but we are sisters. I'll prove it. Just give me time. Oh, all right, chuckled Crocodile. I'll fatten you up. The longer I wait, the plumper you'll get. Crocodile yawned and curled around her eggs. There's Crocodile. Those are her eggs. Crocodile curled around her eggs. Soon she was snoring. Mrs. Chicken made a nest in the corner opposite Crocodile and settled down to lay her own eggs. There's Mrs. Chicken in the opposite corner, and those are Mrs. Chicken's own eggs. Every day, Crocodile gave Mrs. Chicken grain to eat. Every night, they fell asleep over their eggs. Mrs. Chicken got fatter and fatter. Crocodile got thinner and hungrier. One evening, Crocodile said, "This is your last meal. Tomorrow will be my big dinner." "We'll see," said Mrs. Chicken. She waited until Crocodile was sleeping. Then she carefully put her own eggs next to Crocodile. Then she took Crocodile's eggs to her own nest. Just before dawn, Crocodile felt something move beside her. "Mrs. Chicken," she called, "wake up! My babies are hatching. But why do they have those silly little beaks and scrawny little wings? They look like you." "My eggs are hatching too," said Mrs. Chicken. "Look!" And she stepped off her nest. And those are the eggs that have hatched out in Mrs. Chicken's nest. "Oh," said Crocodile, "what beautiful babies you have! What gorgeous green skin! What lovely long mouths! What darlings! They look like me!" "And your babies look like me," said Mrs. Chicken. "I told you we were sisters. You almost ate me. Your own sister." "I'm really sorry, Sister Chicken," said Crocodile. "I have an idea," said Mrs. Chicken. "Since you like my babies so much, you can have them. I'll take your funny-looking babies instead." "Oh, thank you, Sister Chicken," said Crocodile. "Don't mention it," said Mrs. Chicken. "Sisters help one another." And so they switched babies. Crocodile took the babies that hatched out of the eggs in Mrs. Chicken's nest. And Mrs. Chicken took the babies that hatched out of the eggs in Crocodile's nest. "Time for us to go home now," Mrs. Chicken said. She and her babies climbed onto Crocodile's back, and Crocodile carried them across the river. "Bye-bye, sister," Crocodile said. Mrs. Chicken waved her wing and hurried her chicks up the river bank. "See you soon," called Crocodile. "No, you won't," called Mrs. Chicken as she disappeared through the trees. "Come along, children." Cluck, cluck. Since that day, Mrs. Chicken and her children have never gone near the river, and they always take their baths in puddles. "Big enough for us," Mrs. Chicken tells her children, "and much too small for Crocodile." And that's the end of this absolutely charming story of a speckled chicken and a green-skinned crocodile.